Hi, I'm Ed Bacon, the Rector of All Saints Church, Pasadena. Whoever you are and wherever you find yourself on the journey of faith, I hope that you'll find something here that speaks to you. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. So nice to see each of you. Thanks for gathering together for this very important moment of teaching and moment in the development and evolution of our lives. Little did we know that when we were able to arrange for Brian McLaren to be with us today, that we would have had that amazing day with 800 Muslim Americans here in this room and in the church. It was a great day. We had marvelous publicity for it, brought about by our right-wing brothers and sisters who don't get it yet. And three of them were on the sidewalks with the most horrendous, horrible-looking signs and saying bad things to us. But we had an amazing group of interfaith silent witnesses who stood between the ugly voices and our Muslim brothers and sisters, many of whom were quite afraid. And had not had that kind of close-up, negative, dehumanizing speech from Christians. And so it was an opportunity for us to tell them how hateful Christians can be, and to apologize and for them to bathe in the lovely compassion of this place. So it's really wonderful for Brian to be here today to illuminate kind of some of the dynamics that are under that. Let me tell you a little bit about this amazing teacher. He's an author, speaker, activist, and public theologian, former college English teacher and pastor, ecumenical global networker among innovative Christian leaders. From 78 to 86, Brian taught college English, and in 82 he helped form Cedar Ridge Community Church, an innovative, non-denominational church in the Baltimore, Washington region. He left higher education in 1986 to serve as the church's founding pastor and served in that capacity until 2006. During that time, Cedar Ridge, his church, earned a reputation as a leader among emerging missional congregations. Brian has been active in networking and mentoring church planters and pastors since the mid-'80s and has assisted in the development of several new churches. He is a popular conference speaker and a frequent guest lecturer for denominational and ecumenical leadership gatherings across the U.S. and Canada, Latin America, Europe, Africa, and Asia. His public speaking covers a broad range of topics, including postmodern thought and culture, biblical studies, evangelism, leadership, global mission, spiritual formation, worship, pastoral survival, and burnout, interreligious dialogue, ecology, and social justice. He's the author of many books, and the most recent, quite a compelling book I can tell you about from my own reading. Why did Jesus, Moses, the Buddha, and Muhammad cross the road? We are in the hands of a great teacher. Thank God he's free to teach and inspire and help us understand what's really going on. Without further ado, will you warmly welcome, please, Brian McLaren.
Well, it is a great honor to be here, and especially being here today after what happened here in all different ways yesterday. I think it adds just a new level of meaning to the importance of the subject that we're going to consider for a few moments this morning. I'd like to talk for a few minutes, and then we are going to have plenty of time for some questions and discussion. I think since September 11th, 2001, all of us have been gradually possessed by the same question. Can there be peace among passionately faithful people? Or does the existence of deep commitments in the realm of religion automatically mean deep divisions and deep hostility between people? That really was behind the writing of this book. Now, a lot of people have said, well, what's the answer to the question on the title? And I hope someone will remind me to answer that before we're done. We wanted to get a little bit of humor in the title because I think one of the things I learned when I was a senior pastor, I think every clergy person knows this, especially if you do marriage counseling, you know that when couples are very serious, you usually can't help them. You know, when they're each so serious, you have to get people to loosen up a little bit so that they can adjust the dance. And my goodness sakes, I mean, I hate to use a pun like this at a time like this, but isn't it true that religions can become deadly serious? And we need a little bit of humor to loosen things up. And so we decided to work with that famous old joke. Now, this is an embarrassing admission. You know, it says something about you when you go on the internet to research a joke. But I did this, and I found out that the old chicken joke is an example of anti-humor. Anti-humor works by taking the convention of a joke and then saying something that's so completely not funny that it's funny. But it's only funny one time and not that funny. So very quickly after setting up an anti-humor joke, by the way, this one was probably invented in the mid-1800s, people had to start developing some variations on the theme, some of which are very sad. Why? This maybe is especially relevant after yesterday. We should just let that one sink in for a little while. My personal favorite, two stupid chickens. How do I get to the other side? You are on the other side. Which, if you haven't realized this is a deeply postmodern joke. But as soon as we announced the title of the book, as you can imagine, people started sending me things they thought I would be interested in. Why did the chicken cross the road? Albert Einstein. Did the chicken really cross the road, or did the road move beneath the chicken? Sir Isaac Newton. Chickens at rest tend to stay at rest. Chickens in motion. You get it. The nun said it was a habit. Hamlet said, that is not the question. John Donne said, it crosseth for thee. Colonel Sanders said, did I miss one? And then someone sent me this one. Why did the dinosaur cross the road? Now, I need to tell you, I grew up as a Christian fundamentalist. I mean, I grew up way over on the right wing of the fundamentalist world. And so our answer to this, why did the dinosaur cross the road, was because it was the chicken's day off. This second answer we could never have told, which was, why did the dinosaur cross the road? Because the chicken hadn't evolved yet. What is the chicken's deepest dream? To cross the road without anyone questioning his motives. And why did the chicken go to the seance? I'll let you figure that one out. To get to the other side. Okay. But what we wanted to do with the title is, first of all, just to try to get people imagining the founders of several of our religions doing something together. If you know anything about Jesus, you know that Jesus was constantly scandalizing people by his willingness to eat with people who are considered the other, by his willingness to affirm faith in people considered the other, by his willingness, if you know the story of Jesus and the Syrophoenician woman, to even be changed through an encounter with the other. It's really remarkable, the stories that we have in the Gospels about Jesus. Even Jesus' one of his most famous parables is all about crossing roads. Remember the story of the Good Samaritan? The religious leaders crossed the road to stay away from the other. And then the hero of the story is a member of the other who crosses the road to get his hands dirty by caring for the other to him who is in need. I mean, what an amazing example we have in Jesus. It is without question that if Jesus were to meet Muhammad, the Buddha, Moses, Guru Nanak, Wavoka, any of the other great religious leaders through history, that Jesus would treat them way better than Christians have. If you know anything about Moses, I mean, talk about a recipe for interfaith conflicted religious identity syndrome. Muhammad was born the son of Hebrew slaves during a time of attempted genocide or Holocaust, when he was, through the civil disobedience of some Hebrew women, including his mother, he was put out in a little boat of reeds, according to the old story. He was picked up and adopted by the daughter of the household of the nobility that was making slaves. So a slave becomes adopted into a slave-owning family. There's a recipe for a lifelong need for counseling. And when he came of age, he had to make the choice. Which side would he identify with? And he identified with the slaves, but then was rejected and not trusted by either side, forcing him to become what we would call a political and religious refugee, leaving to another land where he married a woman of another religion whose father was a priest of that religion, and that priest of that other religion became Moses' career counselor later in his life. It's really quite a remarkable story. If you know anything about the Buddha, he was certainly not very into religious persecution. His mode was relieving and avoiding suffering, not imposing it. And Muhammad, oh my goodness sakes. I mean, the stories about Muhammad. I was just having dinner with a Muslim friend of mine 5 or 6 weeks ago, and he told me a story that is almost all Muslims know. It's a story early in Islamic history. I can't remember if this happened at Medina or Mecca, but Muhammad and some of his associates welcomed a group of Christian theologians for some civil and respectful debate about an area of theological disagreement. It had to do with the doctrine of the Trinity and the deity and incarnation of Christ. So they engaged in respectful dialogue for some hours. A lot of Christians today don't know that in the early Christian period, that Christians prayed 5 times a day. They didn't have they weren't on the same time zone, basically. Christians and Muslims prayed at slightly different times of the day. But when it was time for the Christians to have their midday prayer, they said to Muhammad and his associates, please excuse us, we'll just go outside of town a ways and we'll have our prayers together. Muhammad said, I built a mosque right here. Come right in and pray inside my mosque. And so they went in to pray in the mosque, at which time Muhammad's associates said to him, how can you let those heretics pray in our mosque? Muhammad said, they're praying, So he was hospitable toward people of another faith. Right from the start. Oh, there's so many stories like this that we could tell. The fact is that Jesus, Moses, the Buddha, and Muhammad could teach, if their followers were listening, their followers could learn an awful lot about how we need to cross the road, here's the punchline, to get to the other at this critical time in history. The starting point for my research was an assumption that we already know how to do 2 things quite well. First, and I'm speaking specifically of us, all of us who call ourselves Christian. Now, folks who are here who are not Christian of any other religion, I'm very pleased that since the book came out, I've had a lot of readers who are Hindu and Muslim and Jewish and Buddhist and atheists who have contacted me and said, listen, the issues you're writing about for Christians, we have these issues too, but it sure is nice to see Christians talking about their own issues for a change. But as a Christian, I think we know how to do two things very well. First, some of us know how to have a strong Christian identity that is hostile toward people of other religions. You understand what I mean by this? The stronger our Christian commitment, the less comfortable we can be that there are lots of other people in our world who don't share it. And we have to do something about it. We either have to convert them to become like us as soon as possible, or we have to marginalize them or inhibit their spread, or in some other way make it harder for them to continue the offense of being different from us. And we know the kinds of things that people with a strong and hostile Christian identity say. A lot of us have seen this at close enough range that we've decided, yeah, that's not really the way we want to be. And I think this is one of the primary causes for the rise in what we might call the spiritual but not religious. People feel like, look, if you're a Christian, you have to take on board so much hostility toward the other. I feel like I'm a worse person if I take on that hostility, so I'm going to disassociate from the Christian religion entirely. In fact, I was speaking at a book event a month or two ago, and a lady came up to me. She said, I heard you speak back when I was in college 10 years ago, and she said, I've kept track. I went to a Christian college. Many of you would know the name of this Christian college. She said, all the students who were in the ministry track, we were preparing for a life as a pastor or a youth minister, a Christian educator. She said there were 70-some of us in my class. I think she actually probably meant different years, but when she was there, 70-some students in the ministry track. She said, we've kept track of each other through Facebook. She says, as of right now, I'm the only one who is in ministry and the only one who attends church. And I'm holding on by a fingernail. And she said, it's exactly what you talked about tonight that's driven so many of us away. We love Jesus. We want to be Christians in that sense, but we don't want to affiliate with a religion that requires us to be hostile toward the other. Now, what a lot of people do is they try to avoid that strong and hostile Christian identity through our second main option, which is to have a weak Christian identity that is tolerant toward people of other religions. In other words, the only way we can figure out how to reduce our hostility is to reduce the potency of our identity. We want to kind of water down the identity so as to say, look, I know you're Muslim, and I know I'm Christian, but look, my religion doesn't matter that much to me, so we can be friends. You see what I'm saying? And I can see why that's an attractive option, although I think there are a lot of consequences to that option, as familiar as it may be to many of us. What we haven't examined deeply enough yet is the option of a strong Christian identity that is benevolent toward other religions. Can I say it this way? Can we imagine a kind of Christian faith? The more deeply bonded we are to it, the more certain it will be that our Muslim or Buddhist or atheist or Hindu neighbor will know that they have in us a true friend. That they have in us someone who respects them, who seeks to understand them, who isn't trying to colonize them or marginalize them or dominate them or eradicate them, but rather someone who, if they're in danger, can be counted to stand with them and stand by them. A friend indeed. Could we imagine that kind of faith? What would it look like? And for some of us, that's quite obvious, and for others of us, it's hard to imagine. And that's why I think so many of us are living with a kind of conflicted religious identity. I'm just going to share one or two quick things, and then we're going to open up for questions. But in the process of writing the book, one of the big discoveries for me required me to reverse my previous assumption, and that was that the problem is religious difference. If we could just have everybody be the same, we would all get along. Of course, all you have to do is say the word Episcopalian, and you realize that having the same label doesn't necessarily mean everybody gets along. And what I came to realize that it's not our differences that are getting us in trouble. It's actually something that we all have in common. And here's what I think it is, among other things. All of us, whatever our Christian denomination or even our other religions, we tend to build strong religious identities through hostility to the other. We learn who we are by distinguishing ourselves from them, and we always do so in a way that makes them look worse. Nobody said it better than James Allison, a brilliant Catholic priest and theologian. Give people a common enemy, and you will give them a common identity. Deprive them of an enemy, and you will deprive them of the crutch by which they know who they are. Now, there's a lot we could say about this in the world of politics. It's not accidental that when the United States, who knew itself through its opposition to the great Satan, Russia, and who knew itself in opposition to communism, when we lost that enemy, we very quickly needed to find another one. And it was very easy for one to present itself. We do this nationally. How would Republicans know who they are if they didn't have Democratic opponents? How would Democrats know who they are if they didn't have Republican opponents? We do it in politics, but we also do it in the world of religion. And that hostility, creating tribal or strong, small identities through religion, no doubt has had some survival value in our distant past. A number of writers have written about this over the last couple of years. But the hostility that gave a tribe stronger identity in opposition to other tribes becomes problematic in a world where we have weapons of mass destruction, and in a world where any hostile tribe can use weapons that can become not only genocidal but geocidal. Not only that, when we face global problems like a changing climate or a growing gap between rich and poor, fueled by an economic system that nobody is in control of, adding to that just the reality that we're all grieving this week, that one of the most profitable and unstoppable industries in the world is the industry of weapons building. When we live in that kind of a world, the pumping up of hostility against them in order to create a stronger identity among us, whether it's in the political or religious or other world, suddenly that becomes a threat to our survival, which is really the impetus for me in really grappling with this subject in this book and in my life. Can we imagine a new kind of Christian identity that is strong and benevolent toward the other? I'll just close with a quick passage of scripture that it's funny, we all get a theological training or background, consciously or unconsciously, that teaches us to notice certain things and miss other things. One of my mentors taught me, what you notice determines what you miss. And I had never really read the Bible with a deep awareness toward hostility and otherness until the last couple of years. But as I've done so, I'm just noticing on every page that I've been missing a lot, that there's an awful lot there. Take, for example, what's often called Jesus' Nazareth Manifesto in Luke chapter 4. When he came to Nazareth, where he'd been brought up, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, as was his custom, stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Now, a lot of biblical scholars have pointed out that Jesus stops, rolls up the scroll, and hands it back at this point, and leaves off the last sentence of the passage, which is significant. Although the last sentence of the passage is, "To let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor, and the day of vengeance of our God." And a lot of people have wondered, is that just accidental that he left that off, or is it significant? Well, let's keep reading. He rolled up the scroll, gave it back, sat down. The eyes of all in the synagogue were fixed on him. He began to say to them, today the scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. In my theological tradition, he was wrong. He should have said, today the scripture has already and not yet been fulfilled in your hearing, but that's another story. Spoke well of him, and we were amazed at the gracious words that came from his mouth. They said, is this not Joseph's son? Do you see what's happening? This is pride in our hometown boy. We know his daddy. He's one of us. He said to them, doubtless you'll quote this proverb to me, Doctor, cure yourself, and you'll say, do here in your hometown the things that we have heard you did in Capernaum. And he said, truly I tell you, no prophet is accepted in the prophet's hometown. Now, whatever Jesus is doing here, his campaign advisors are smacking themselves in the head at this point. Like, you had them in the palm of your hand. They really liked you. They were going to vote for you, and then you add this. But the truth is, and listen to this, there were many widows in Israel in the time of Elijah when the heaven was shut up for 3 years and 6 months, and there's a severe famine over all the land. Yet Elijah was sent to none of them except to a widow at Zarephath in Sidon. There were also many lepers in Israel at the time of the prophet Elisha, and none of them was cleansed except Naaman the Syrian. When they heard this, they were filled with rage. They got up, drove him out of the town, led him to the brow on which their town was built so that they might hurl him off the cliff. But he passed through the midst of them and went on his way. I can just hear the MSNBC report about the huge drop in poll numbers after his campaign gaffe in Nazareth. But you get the idea. At the moment when he has everybody saying, he's one of us, he's our boy, he's one of us, he wants to tear apart that understanding of us and them that wants to just say us versus them. And he wants to tell a story that says God cares about them too. He cares about a widow in Sidon, and he cares about a military officer from a neighboring army of them. I mean, it's a remarkable thing. You know that profound vision that comes from the prophet Isaiah of the lion lying down with the lamb. Listen, folks, Isaiah was a smart guy. He wasn't worried about intermammalian relationships. He wasn't writing about lions and lambs. He was writing about predatory people, hostile people who are constantly threatening vulnerable people. And the dream that we would learn to live as human beings without hostility and aggression toward one another is a dream that Jesus was very tuned to, and that if we want to call ourselves Christians, I think we have to be tuned to as well. In the book, I talk about 4 challenges that we have to grapple with: a historical, a doctrinal, liturgical, and missional. But if we had a couple more hours, we could talk about that. But I want to have a few minutes now for some questions. So this is a good place for me to stop. And I guess if you will raise your hand, I will find you. And if you'll keep your question really brief. Oh, we have a microphone, so let's come right up here. And if you'll keep your question really brief, I'll try to keep my answer brief. So thanks. Thank you very much. And I'll tell you what, after these 2 gentlemen, I would like to impose the boy-girl rule, okay? So if we possibly can, we'll try to get the variety. Yes?
What is your understanding of evil as personified in devil, as far as we look at the other and the evil present there, the enemy present there? Is the personification of the devil thereby enhanced?
Yes, this is a huge question. As you may know, Elaine Pagels wrote a book about this, about how the devil, or being of the devil, has been a primary tool for focusing hostility on the other, in some way removing a person from normal human decency, what we would say today, from being worthy of human rights. But I'll tell you who 2 people I highly recommend on this subject. One is Walter Wink, recently deceased. If someone wanted to read one of his books, I'd recommend The Powers That Be. But there's also a fascinating French anthropologist who I think his work is going to be I think it's historically important in the history of Christianity. His name is René Girard. And Girard points out that the 2 terms that are used for Satan, one is diabolo, the accuser. And so if you think of it this way, whenever we want to scapegoat someone, Muslims, gay people, immigrants, we have to accuse them of something. And that puts them in the category now where they're vulnerable. And so this is where we have a really, really big job to do, is paying deeper attention to the way that the demonization of the other leads to a dehumanization of the other, that then leads to the possibility of us becoming criminals against a precious human being. So thanks. Big, really important question.
I'm a Buddhist Christian, and one of the things that I get from Buddhism is really what you were just talking about, the non-dual teachings of the Buddha.
Yes.
And obviously Jesus was that kind of person.
Yes.
But somehow Christianity from a very early time, and the Jews and the Muslims, a lot of them have completely forgotten this. So there's this right-wrong duality that just pervades these religions. And it's always been something that has bothered me about these traditions. So say something about that.
Yes, well, I couldn't agree with you more. In the book, yes, the comment was from a gentleman who is a Buddhist Christian. My friends who are Jewish and Buddhists call themselves Jew-boos, but I don't know. We haven't figured out a good name for this. But his comment was that something he appreciates about Buddhism is that there is a category that's extremely important called non-dual thinking or non-dual seeing. And if I could just maybe make a word of explanation, we have maybe the viewpoint of a little baby is that the world is all us. But very soon a baby learns, oh, there's us and there's them. And so the viewpoint of a child is to always see the world in dualistic terms. And many of our religious and political traditions do everything in their power to keep people seeing the world in dualistic terms for the rest of their lives, to never let them imagine anything beyond dualism. But in Eastern traditions, this is deeply embedded and explicit. And in Western traditions, in Judaism, Christianity, Islam, it is present, but it has primarily been present in the mystical traditions, not in the more institutional expressions that have had close relationships with political forces that always like to have an enemy, you see. So this something beyond dualistic thinking is incredibly important. Friends of mine, Richard Rohr, Cynthia Bourgeois, have been writing about this a lot. I wrote about this a bit in a book called Naked Spirituality, the only one of my books that my father is really embarrassed about the title. It says, couldn't it have been transparent spirituality? But it's really, really, it's important. And I think in some ways my book is an attempt to try to help Christians today imagine a non-dual way of understanding our own faith. And it's deeply, deeply important.
Yes, it seems like this is something that's been happening lately, but how come religion has become so politicized, not only nationally, but internationally? Do you see any trend to change that movement, or is there any way to do it?
Well, you're raising an extremely important question, and I wish we had 3 hours on that one. I mentioned this fellow René Girard earlier, and Girard suggests that the origins of religion and politics in our evolutionary anthropological past are united in violence. In other words, religion and what we call religion and government were attempts to use violence to reduce violence. And the question is, will our governments and our religious communities ever progress to the point where they are ready to possibly agree that Jesus was right? That those who live by the sword die by the sword, that the attempt to purge violence by violence always ends up strengthening violence. And so that we have to begin to imagine another way of dealing with violence and hostility. And And I think the answer, do I think it ever will happen? All I can say is it must happen. Because if it doesn't, we're already at a tipping point where the gravity of the problems we face and the power of the weapons we've invented are already have brought us to the place where we have to be there. And that's why a room full of people like us, look, if we were the only people on earth thinking about this, this would be a good start. But there are people all around the world grappling with this. Frankly, I think this is one of the reasons it's worth it to get up on a Sunday morning and come to a place like this. And it's really, I wrote about this in the book, but I think liturgy can actually be a weekly bonding to the meaning of a vision, a non-dual vision of reconciliation. And so that's our challenge ahead. We have someone here. Okay, we'll go here, and then we'll go here. Yes.
Go ahead, please. Yes. Sometimes I feel
love getting to the head of the line. Thank you. Am I on?
Being in all sense that the greatest dichotomy is not between it's between our own faith,
yes,
not between ours and the other.
Yes.
We heard justified criticism from the pulpit this morning about remarks made by a fundamentalist Christian.
Yeah.
We heard such remarks before. I'm wondering why that is.
Yeah.
I feel that we are less tolerant of the fundamentalists than we are of other faiths. Yeah. Am I getting this wrong, or?
Well, you're raising an issue that I've thought a lot about as well, and I wrote about this a bit in my book, and I think there are many different dimensions of it, but I'll offer two since our time is so limited. One is this: our greatest threat, the greatest threat to me, is very seldom them. The greatest threat to me is more often us. Members of us can do me more harm than members of them, usually. I don't know if you've thought about it that way, but I talk about this in a book. I was in a Christian, Muslim, Jewish online dialogue that went on for a couple of years, and I just made this comment once, and I received a lot of private notes from other members of the group who said, this is true, but I can't say it for fear of what members of my religion would say about me if I agreed with you. See, so that's part of the problem. That us has a greater threat toward us than they do usually. Secondly, I think we have a responsibility to grapple with the problems among us before we try to go fixing the problems of them. I think that's in large part what Jesus meant when he said, don't try to take the splinter out of your brother's eye when you have a pencil sticking out of your own. You know, you have to deal with the problem, my problems and our problems first. So I think that's why we have that among many other reasons why that's a real issue. Yes?
Last question?
Well, all right. I wanted to back up to what you'd said before, and I didn't know if you would go there, but obviously a dialogue or a multi-logue is taking place in the country today about the issues of violence. And I don't think it's about simply gun control, and I don't think it's about psychiatrists dealing with young, damaged young. I think there is something very profoundly happening in this country, and it isn't happening in other countries to the same degree. One, do you have some sense of why that is so? And second of all, do we have a path forward? Is that path through Christian reconciliation?
Yeah. Okay, this is a phenomenal question, and we need an hour. So,
sorry.
But here's what I could say in just a moment. In the book, I talk about how the Christian faith made a deal. The leaders of the Western Christian faith made a deal with Emperor Constantine. And we have not yet come to terms with the degree to which, whether we're Catholic, Protestant, liberal, conservative, we are all Constantinian Christians. And we may have to make a decision to realize that you cannot serve two masters. You cannot serve Christ and Constantine. There are effects of embracing an imperial identity and mixing an imperial or colonial identity with a Christian identity that we haven't come to terms with yet. So That's one thing I would say. Second thing I would say is that one of the characteristics of any group of people who are the haves is that they live in a deep and unspoken fear of the have-nots, that their having will be disrupted by the have-nots. And when that happens, it's just so predictable, the consequences of that happening. You need to build a nation in a constant warrior trance in order to keep vigilance to protect what we have from what they want to take. And so here we are in a nation that whose entertainment is fantasies of violence. It is very hard to go to a movie that the plot does not hinge on redemptive violence. And so which is a very scary thing to think about. So we're at an interesting moment in history, and being in the LA area is a great place to do this since we're so near the centers of the entertainment industry. What would it mean for us to start telling stories that have another kind of redemption rather than redemptive violence? And frankly, that's part of what we're going to celebrate in the Christmas season each year, that God is revealed to us through a vulnerable, unarmed baby. God is revealed to us in vulnerability, not in victimization, not in making victims, but comes to us in the position of vulnerability. I hope as we sing our Christmas carols, maybe that will more deeply be embedded in us in the coming weeks. Amen? Thank you.